Coming up, it's the final day of the 2022 Reservation Economic Summit in Las Vegas. A leader from Nevada weighs in, and we meet an award-winning education advocate. Plus, a politics update. I am Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
Arizona PBS is proud to support Indian Country Today. For 6 decades, we've provided television programs and now digital content. But we go beyond that, sending outreach teams across Arizona, offering workshops in language and literacy, family engagement and community outreach, and supporting tribal communities with early learning and school readiness resources. Join us at azpbs.org.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Amadawa Hopa, thank you for joining us. We're on day 4 of the 2022 Reservation Economic Summit in Las Vegas. This is the homeland of the Nuuvi, also known as the Southern Paiute people. We begin in Washington, D.C., where the potential next leader of the Indian Health Service addressed members of the U.S. Senate. On Wednesday, Navajo citizen Rosalind So testified before the Senate Indian Affairs Committee. She is President Biden's nominee to be the director of the IHS. The position has been left vacant for over a year. Previously, So was the director of the Navajo Area Indian Health Services. She brings nearly 4 decades of experience. She addressed this in her testimony.
The healthcare at the IHS is critical for those we serve. I understand this not just because I work there, because my family relies on IHS, my friends rely on IHS, and I rely on IHS.
So started at the health agency in 1984 in Oregon. If confirmed by the Senate, So would oversee the health care of 2.6 million Indigenous people in the U.S. More from presidential appointments. An Alaska Native Arctic expert has been appointed to President Biden's Arctic Research Commission. The mission of this body is to build links in Arctic research within the federal government. Koyukon Athabascan citizen Nikush Carlo has lots of experience in advancing community-based solutions to climate change. Among her many roles and responsibilities, Carlo serves as a co-principal investigator with the National Science Foundation, and she also co-chairs the Indigenous Advisory Board. Carlo says she looks forward to building a long-term, action-oriented vision for Arctic research. Sand paintings and finance, that's not something that typically goes together. At Res 2022, a Dene artist is using his talents to blend these two together to bring awareness to climate change. ICT's Mark Trahant reports.
So it's so unique that I just was self-taught.
John Nelson has been an artist for some 40 years. Lately, he's been using his sand painting skills to add to the conversation about a big issue.
Climate change, global warming, and using it as a tool to help society share the message.
Nelson is a board member for the Clearinghouse Community Development Finance Institution. It's a national public service lender based in Lake Forest, California. One of the institution's goals is to help Indigenous people with their business. Nelson says working with that institution was a perfect opportunity.
And as I gather my material, I like to report a lot of these sites that people aren't aware of, because I travel through the mountains and pick up my material, and it's all natural pigments. And I've seen, some of the contaminated places, and that's sad.
Even though he's seen some of the damage, Nelson has a plan to keep elevating this issue through his art. One of his paintings took over 6 months to complete. Nelson says he is planning on giving this to the CEO of the National Center for American Indian Economic Development, Chris James.
So I'm trying to protect Mother Earth, all related to the healing. And sand paint is actually a form of a different perspective of healing.
In Las Vegas, Mark Trahant, ICT News.
In Brazil, an Indigenous artist is beginning to grow a customer base for dolls reflecting the culture and identity of her people. Luaquam Anabe always dreamed of having her own dolls. The Anabe citizen has worked since she was 8 years old and says she never had time to play. But now, 4 decades later, she is at the helm of a small business selling handmade indigenous dolls. The dolls all share the same long, dark, straight hair with faces and body paint that can be found among the Anabe people. The dollmaker says through her work, she is giving indigenous women some representation that they lack on toy shelves.
Elas se sentem muito empolgadas.
Women especially get very excited. Indigenous women especially, because they see themselves in the doll. They feel represented. They feel empowered, knowing that there's an indigenous doll on the market. Because before, there were only white dolls, then black dolls, but never indigenous.
Anabe sells dolls bearing the face and body paints of 6 different indigenous groups. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Coming up, from education to politics, we're talking to thought leaders in Indian country. From Las Vegas, Nevada, we'll be right back. There are 27 tribal nations, bands, and colonies in the state of Nevada. Stacy Montooth's job is to make sure their voices are being heard in the state's politics. Stacy is the executive director of the Nevada Indian Commission. She was appointed to the position by Governor Steve Sisolak in 2019 and currently sits as part of his cabinet. Hi, Stacy. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Good morning. Hama, welcome to the Great Basin.
Thank you so much for that. We've been just knee deep in Res all week. And so I'd love to ask you, what your takeaway is from Res, and specifically how big of a part Res is to Nevada tribal nations.
Oh, wow. Well, Res is huge here in the Great Basin, or what is now the state of Nevada. As you mentioned, we have 27 tribal nations. We have such amazing attendance. We have our intertribal council meetings here. I've got to meet with our elected officials in person for the first time in a really, really long time. My understanding is they have over 4,500 participants here. A very, very smart tribal leader that I know says what's good for Indian country is good for the rest of the world. So this convention has really been second to none, especially coming out of the pandemic.
Right, and we've heard that so often. When you're here and you're talking to folks and you're attending sessions, what kinds of conversations are you having? And what kinds of pulse are you getting on sort of what's happening in Indian country right now?
Oh my goodness. They run the gamut. Honestly, we talk about everything from upcoming powwows and social events. Of course, in Nevada, we start early voting on Saturday. We're talking about elections. ARPA, American Rescue Fund Act, is still really big, and we're still sorting that out here. But like all of Indian country, we're also talking about Secretary Holland's initiative and the recent hearing about that.
Right. Let's actually talk more about that. As you know, and many people are aware, Secretary Holland has released the first volume of her federal boarding school report. In Nevada, what Indian school or federal Indian school was located here, and sort of maybe tell us more about that?
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. So in Nevada, according to the report, we have 3 Indian boarding schools. The only off-reservation boarding school was the Stewart Indian Boarding School. It ran for 90 years, starting in 1890. In fact, that is where my office is located. When the school ceased to operate, and that was in 1980. So for a lot of us, that was just the other day. So after 90 years, when it stopped, the property, the campus, was actually divided in 2, and the federal government returned half of it to the Washoe people. It was their indigenous land to start with. And then the balance, about 100 acres, is now owned by the state of Nevada. And we have about 6 agencies, including the Nevada Indian Commission, that operate out of the buildings that our relatives constructed.
Right.
I can actually look out my window from my desk and see the dormitories where my grandma grew up.
How does that feel for you? I think for so many people in Indian country, we all have these really close connections to these institutions. But for you, as you mentioned, to look out the window,
Right.
how do you sort of navigate that?
Well, it's not always easy. You're absolutely right about the impact. You're not going to find a Paiute, Shoshone, or Washoe who isn't a direct descendant or isn't a survivor of the Stewart Indian boarding school. I can tell you for me, and maybe my approach is a little different, but I have the privilege of being appointed by Governor Sisolak, the highest elected official in the state. My job is to improve the quality of life for the Indigenous people. It's about 80,000 constituents in this state. So my mission is exactly opposite of what the federal government set out to do in 1890. So in a way, I mean, I'm not proud of this, but I'm sticking it to the man because I survived. And now, again, my day-to-day job is to embrace our culture, to support our tribal nations, which is exactly opposite of what Uncle Sam tried to do.
Yeah. As we move forward in, the next phases of this boarding school investigation, how important is it to the governor of Nevada to be working with federal agencies to investigate what happened at places like the Stewart Indian School?
I'm so glad you asked that. So I really feel that the Nevada Indian Commission gets total support from Governor Sisolak's office. In December, he met with all of our tribal leaders. Actually, we had a convening at the Stewart Indian Boarding School. In addition to inviting leadership from every tribe, we had elders. We had folks who actually grew up at Stewart, and they gave their personal testimony. There was not any dry eyes in the room. As soon as that conversation concluded, the governor went out to the front steps of one of the buildings and met with the media and apologized. He apologized for the involvement that the state had in operating the Stewart Indian Boarding School. The state of Nevada had actually sold bonds to purchase the land to operate the school. Governor Sisolak has sent a personal letter to Secretary Holland to follow up on the conversations that he heard and undertook in December. And, we're working hard at the Nevada Indian Commission to make sure that we're as prepared as possible for Volume 2. We remind everybody that today actually is the deadline for personal testimony to be submitted. Our very own U.S. Senator from Nevada, Jackie Rosen, she has put in a call to have another hearing. So we look forward to that as well.
Well, good. And we, of course, will continue to follow it. Stacey, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to make sure that I take the opportunity to say how Indian Country Today has just revolutionized media in our communities, and we couldn't be more grateful. Thank you.
We're back with another recipient of the Native American 40 Under 40 Awards. Carrie Whitlow is the Executive Director of the Cheyenne and Arapaho Education Department. She was honored Wednesday night for her achievement. Congratulations, Carrie, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk with you.
So for the folks who aren't at Res and didn't attend this ceremony last night, kind of describe the atmosphere. What was going through your mind as you were, accepting your award?
I think everyone there was very much in a celebratory mood. I think it may be the participants of the conference, it had been a long week, so everyone was just excited for all of the recipients, and it was just nice to see. I didn't know a lot of people going in, but then I ran into a handful of people. My governor was there, our tribal attorney, and so it was nice to celebrate with them and just, I guess, celebrate the award. It was a lot of fun, and people you didn't even know if they knew you were a recipient, they would just tell you congratulations. So that was nice.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the event as well. While we're talking about this, I do want to say that I felt like the massacre and the really unfortunate event that happened in Texas really has been something that a lot of us have been thinking about here. And, you know, for you working in an education department, I mean, what is your reaction as you're coming to this event and trying to enjoy yourself, but at the same time, you know, thinking about what happened?
Yes, because I think once you just get on social media or watch the news and that's all that keeps popping up. So I was thinking about that yesterday, and these are fourth graders. My daughter's in third grade. So it hits home because also these are kids that look like our kids. And so it definitely makes you think about what is in place at our schools in our service area that we work with. Are they protected? Do they have security system? Who's allowed to go in and out? What do they have in place? And we shouldn't have to think that way, but that's just the reality that we're in. And my daughter's father and I had a conversation about just her school and, you know, who's allowed to go in and what are their practices or what do they have in place. And so it's definitely makes you think about the world that we're in and what our kids, you know, could be going through.
Right.
And so it's definitely hard to see and hard to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I feel all of that at the same time. And you working in education, I mean, as you know, an educator, as an administrator, I imagine that that's really heavy. I want to actually talk about the services that you provide for the tribes. Tell us about that.
The Cheyenne-Arapaho tribe is a service-based tribe where we are always asking ourselves with our gaming money, how are we helping our tribal citizens? How are we giving back? How are we helping them? So in the way that we do it through services, so we have higher education, we have a scholarship program that we, you know, help higher ed students, you know, go to college specifically. And then we have a JOM program. We also cover early childhood, pre-K through 12, and then higher education. So, I mean, graduation announcements, graduation pictures. We do so many services that's always been our focus for a number of years. But within the last few years, we also have taken on the responsibility of wanting to educate our tribal citizens because we have the resources to do that within our department. We have 12 tribal programs right now and really trying to build capacity and how do we our main goal is always how are we helping our families and students in any way possible, in any situation that comes up, who can help, what program can do what. So that's always the main objective of what we do.
And I understand you actually are pushing for an effort to revitalize your language. Is that right?
Yes. So that's been years underway. We've had 3 A&A grants within the last year. Our tribal legislature allocated $2 million to our language program and our language efforts. So they've been doing a master apprentice program of trying to produce fluent speakers. Also, we just redid our strategic plan. So there are a number of efforts where we're doing community classes, Zoom classes, creating our own curriculum, creating our own teacher standards, creating our own courses that we want to offer in the public school system, but then also within that, training our teachers, having teachers that look like us paying for them, training them, educating them so that when they do teach that's coming from a system that we produce, not from a non-native system.
Yeah, so important. We hear that from educators all the time. I want to end on a good note, and we don't have a lot of time left, but it's graduation season, and I understand I saw some photos on your tribe's Facebook page of a Head Start graduation specifically. Yes. Tell us about that.
So the Head Start, within our department, we oversee 3 Head Starts. So that's in Concho, Clinton, and Canton, and those are 3 communities within our service area. And so we had a total of maybe 21 graduates. And so this year, because of COVID, we didn't know what it would look like. We did a drive-through. And let me tell you that our parents are so extra and they just do the most for their kids. So they drove through, they decorated their cars, and it was just so much fun to see these little kids just wave and so excited to see their family. So when they drove through, they got their award, they got in the car and went home. But it was just a lot of fun to see because in my position, I don't always get to work with kids and see kids every day in our families. So it's always nice to have that reminder of why we do what we do.
Right. And, they're the next generation of 40
Absolutely.
under 40, right?
Yes,
so we'll
absolutely.
be here interviewing them in a few years. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Carrie, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's time again for a politics update. Holly Cook-Macaro is a partner at Spirit Rock Consulting and has been working with tribal nations for more than 20 years. She is a regular contributor to the ICT Newscast. Hi, Holly. Welcome to Las Vegas. We're here in person, so I'm so excited to see you today.
Yes, thank you. This has been a great and busy week with Res 2022.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, we were talking about this earlier in the newscast, but of course, everyone here at Res has been talking about the terrible tragedy that happened in Texas. And again, it spurred some new conversation about gun legislation, and that seems to be the topic of conversation right now.
Yes, it really does in the Senate, which is about to go out on a 10-day recess for the Memorial Day weekend, which is not good timing for the movement on gun legislation. We're up against a wall of 50 Republicans who are not in support. And, when you have legislation and some momentum, which is usually in the moment, when you take that break, it loses some of that. And I think all of America, it's very clear that is frustrated with the lack of progress on what clearly the majority of Americans would like to see move at a minimum of reasonable background checks or the red flag law that I think most agree to now. So the prospects of this, we won't see it anytime soon. It's at least a couple of weeks down the road. And there will be a lot of maneuvering between now and then.
Right. And of course, federal officials, state officials are calling for action. But as you said, it sounds like we're kind of just stalled at this point. So we'll kind of wait and see what happens there. This tragedy that happened in Texas, of course, really makes us think about all the other tragedies that have happened. And there's one very close to your home. Tell us about that.
Yes, we just had the 17-year anniversary of the school shooting on the Red Lake Indian Reservation, which is my home. And when I first heard the news of the shooting in Uvalde, it's like a punch in the gut. You just think, oh, this is the sort of pain the community is feeling when you lose so many children. It really strikes at the heart, and it brought back the memories of what my own community went through, both in the immediate aftermath and the long-term effects. The survivors of those shootings, they live with that every day.
Right. And do you think that that's something that they're thinking about even more now, given what's going on in the news and what happened in Texas?
Yes, absolutely. I wasn't at the school that day. I was called home to assist our tribal government in the response. But for those survivors, yes, they feel it. Right, absolutely, right. These memories.
Well, I want to switch gears a little bit because yesterday there was a very important nomination hearing in the Senate. So tell us about what you think how Rosalind So did, and what to expect moving forward.
Yes, I thought Rosalind So did very well in her confirmation hearing to be the new IHS director. She was nominated by President Biden not 2 months ago, I think, or maybe it's been 2 months. And this is a spot a critical spot for Indian country that we want to see filled. It brings a voice to the table to advocate for policy, for funding. And so her confirmation hearing is what I would say uneventful, which is exactly the kind of hearing you want to have. So she answered the questions well. There was some limited participation. Some key senators were missing. Senator Murkowski was out, but she did go through, and I thought she did very well.
So if the Senate's taking a recess, where do you think that leaves her nomination at?
So they'll report that her nomination out of the Indian Affairs Committee to the full Senate for consideration and confirmation on the floor. Getting that calendar will be the key. So I think it will be several weeks before we see that actually teed up and her in place as a confirmed IHS director.
Sure. Well, we'll of course keep watching that, and we'll talk about that when it happens, because that is a really big position. I want to switch gears again and talk about Res, because everywhere you walk around the halls here, we've seen folks from the White House, we've seen tribal leaders. Maybe talk about who you've seen here and who stood out to you.
Yes, I thought it was an extraordinary level of participation from the federal side. Pauwi Rivera, who is here from the White House, he is here. Heather Don Thompson, Office of Tribal Relations at the Department of Agriculture. We saw a whole cadre of folks from small business, which was incredible. And so I think the engagement by the federal agencies here at Res really brought a lot of substance to this conference, and allowed for tribal leaders to engage, in policy and things that are coming up with this administration. So I thought it was extraordinary, the amount of federal engagement.
Yeah, I was surprised too. I mean, we just came out of COVID, and I've seen so many of these federal officials, interviewed them, spoke to them on Zoom, and I said, oh my goodness, I get to see you in person. It's wonderful to be able to do that. Maybe talk a little bit about how important it is, or I guess I should say, how they would have weighed coming to Res versus not coming to Res. And I'm sorry, we only have a short time left, but I want to talk a little bit about how much of a priority it was for them.
Yes, this is a new work landscape for everyone. And so some folks are still working remotely. Some folks don't want to travel. I think, that is all a consideration. We see this resurgence, a bit. Folks are going back to masking a bit. I saw that as well. So those considerations and events that are coming up, I think everyone is considering those things, but I did really see a much higher level of participation. And as you noted, it kind of warms the heart to get to see everyone in person again.
Definitely. Well, Holly, thanks for being here.
Yes, thank you, Leah.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For more news, visit IndianCountryToday.com. From all of us in Las Vegas, stay safe, my relatives. I am Aaliyah Chavez.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.